"That inheritance should be mine," my sister said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass in the suffocating silence of the law office. "Read the second page," I whispered back, my fingers trembling as I clutched the will that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany conference room felt smaller with each passing second as my sister Victoria's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the polished table. Her Chanel suit, the one she'd bought specifically for today's reading, made a statement about who she thought deserved our grandmother's fortune. Beside her sat her husband Derek, his expensive watch catching the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Blackwood Associates. I'd chosen my outfit more carefully than I'd ever chosen anything in my life. A simple black dress that cost less than Victoria's shoes, but it was clean and respectful. More importantly, it was honest, unlike the woman sitting across from me. "Ladies, if I may continue," said Mr. Blackwood, the elderly attorney whose family had managed the Whitmore estate for 3 generations. His weathered hands held the document that contained my grandmother's final wishes, words that had been sealed for exactly 37 days since her passing. Victoria leaned forward, her diamond earrings, a gift from our grandmother 2 Christmases ago, swaying with the movement. "Of course, please proceed. I'm eager to understand the distribution of assets." The way she said, "distribution of assets," made my stomach turn. Our grandmother, Eleanor Whitmore, had been dead barely a month, and Victoria was already calculating square footage and investment portfolios. As I was saying, Mr. Blackwood adjusted his reading glasses. Eleanor Whitmore's last will and testament, dated March 15th of this year, begins with her personal message to her granddaughters. March 15th, 3 months before her death. 3 months after Victoria's last visit to grandmother's house. A visit I now understood had been far more significant than anyone realized. "To my beloved granddaughters, Victoria and Sarah," Mr. Blackwood read in his measured tone. "You have both brought joy to my life in different ways. Victoria, your ambition and success in business have made me proud. Sarah, your dedication to our family and your gentle spirit have been a constant comfort to me in my final years." Victoria's smile widened. She'd always been the successful one, the one with the corner office at Henderson Marketing, the one with the perfect husband and the immaculate house in Beacon Hill. While I'd been caring for grandmother through her illness, Victoria had been building her empire. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "However," Mr. Blackwood continued, and something in his tone made Victoria's smile falter slightly, "I have made my decision regarding my estate based not on financial success, but on character, loyalty, and love demonstrated through actions rather than words." The room went completely silent except for the soft tick of the antique clock on Mr. Blackwood's desk. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. "To my granddaughter Victoria, I leave my jewelry collection, excluding the family pearls, along with the contents of my safe deposit box at First National Bank. Additionally, she shall receive the sum of $50,000. Victoria's face went through several emotions: relief, confusion, then something that looked suspiciously like panic. $50,000 was generous, but it wasn't the multi-million-dollar inheritance she'd been expecting. "To my granddaughter Sarah," Mr. Blackwood's voice seemed to grow stronger, "who stayed by my side through my illness, who read to me when my eyes grew tired, who held my hand during my final days. To Sarah, I leave the remainder of my estate. This includes my house at 47 Maple Street, all remaining financial assets, stocks, bonds, and real estate holdings. The total value is approximately $3.2 million. The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Victoria's face had gone completely white, then flushed red, then white again, Derek's hand moved protectively to his wife's shoulder, but she shrugged him off. "That's impossible," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There must be some mistake." Mr. Blackwood's expression remained neutral, professional. "I assure you, Mrs. Henderson, there is no mistake. Your grandmother was very specific about her wishes. But," Victoria stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor, "this doesn't make sense. I'm the eldest. I'm the successful one. I have a business to run, employees to pay. Sarah is just—" She gestured at me dismissively. "She doesn't even have a real job." "I work at the library," I said quietly. "And I took care of grandmother." "That's not a career. That's babysitting," Victoria snapped, her composure completely unraveling. "Grandmother promised me that house. She told me it would be mine someday." Mr. Blackwood cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should continue reading. There are additional provisions." Victoria sat back down heavily, her hands shaking as she reached for the glass of water his assistant had provided. Derek whispered something in her ear, but she ignored him, her eyes fixed on the will in Mr. Blackwood's hands. "I am aware that this decision may cause discord between my granddaughters," the attorney continued reading. "Therefore, I have left a more detailed explanation of my reasoning in a sealed letter to be given to Sarah along with the keys to the house." He handed me a cream-colored envelope, my name written in grandmother's distinctive script across the front. My hands were shaking as I accepted it, feeling the weight of whatever truth it contained. "Furthermore," Mr. Blackwood continued, "should Victoria choose to contest this will, she should be aware that I have left evidence of her activities in March of this year, along with documentation of her attempts to influence my estate planning during my final months." Victoria's face went ashen. "What evidence? What is he talking about?" Mr. Blackwood's expression remained carefully neutral, but I caught something in his eyes, a flicker of disappointment, perhaps even disgust. "The letter in Sarah's possession will explain everything. Mrs. Whitmore was very thorough in her documentation." "This is ridiculous," Derek spoke for the first time, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Victoria deserves that inheritance. She's worked hard, built a successful business. She shouldn't be penalized because she didn't have time to play nursemaid." The word nursemaid hit me like a physical blow. For 18 months, I'd rearranged my entire life to care for our grandmother. I'd moved back into my childhood room, taken a part-time position at the library instead of my full-time job at the museum, spent every evening reading to her, every morning helping her with her medication, every weekend driving her to doctor's appointments. While I was holding grandmother's hand through chemotherapy sessions, Victoria had been networking at charity galas. While I was learning to cook her favorite meals as her appetite waned, Victoria was closing business deals and buying investment properties. And now Victoria was sitting in this law office, outraged that loyalty and love had been valued over financial success. "There's more," Mr. Blackwood said, his voice carrying a warning tone. Mrs. Whitmore also included a provision about the family business. I'd forgotten about the business. Grandmother had owned a small but profitable antique shop downtown, something she'd started after grandfather died. It had been closed since her illness worsened, but the property alone was worth a considerable amount. The antique shop and its contents are to be sold, with the proceeds going to establish the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation for Elder Care Support. Sarah will serve as the foundation's director, with an annual salary of $60,000 for as long as she chooses to fulfill this role. Victoria made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "A foundation? She's giving away our inheritance to strangers?" "Grandmother cared about more than just family," I said, finding my voice at last. "She volunteered at the senior center for 20 years. She knew how many elderly people have no one to care for them." "That's very noble," Derek said, his tone suggesting it was anything but. "But Victoria has practical concerns. She's been counting on this inheritance to expand her business." The casual admission hung in the air between us. Victoria had been counting on grandmother's death. She'd been making business plans based on money that wasn't hers yet, from a woman who was still alive. Mr. Blackwood gathered the papers with the efficiency of someone who'd witnessed family drama countless times before. The will is legal and binding. Mrs. Whitmore had it reviewed by 3 separate attorneys to ensure there could be no successful challenge. However, if you choose to contest it, the court fees and legal costs will be deducted from any inheritance you might receive. Victoria's jaw clenched. I need to see that letter. It's addressed to Sarah, Mr. Blackwood said firmly. Mrs. Whitmore was specific that it should be opened privately. But if it contains evidence about me, then perhaps you already know. What it says, I interrupted, my voice stronger than I'd expected. Something in grandmother's letter, something about Victoria's behavior in March, had made our grandmother change her will. And from Victoria's reaction, she knew exactly what that something was. Victoria stood again, this time more slowly, her movements controlled but her face still pale. This isn't over, Sarah. That money belongs to the family, not to some charity for strangers. I am family, I said quietly. I was the family who was here. Derek guided Victoria toward the door, his hand firm on her elbow. Our attorney will be in touch, he said to Mr. Blackwood. This will doesn't reflect Mrs. Whitmore's true intentions. Mr. Henderson, Mr. Blackwood's voice carried, the authority of decades in law. I would strongly advise against any legal action. Mrs. Whitmore anticipated every possible challenge and took measures to ensure her wishes would be respected. After they left, the office felt larger, quieter. I sat alone with Mr. Blackwood, the sealed letter in my lap feeling heavier with each passing moment. She was very fond of you, he said gently. Your grandmother. She spoke often about your kindness during our meetings. I loved her, I said simply. She was more like a mother to me after our parents died. Mr. Blackwood nodded. She mentioned that. She also mentioned that Victoria's visits became quite infrequent after your parents' accident, but that you never missed a Sunday dinner. The accident had been 8 years ago. A drunk driver on a rainy Thursday evening had taken both our parents in an instant, leaving Victoria and me as each other's only family besides grandmother. Victoria had thrown herself into work, building her business into the success it was today. I had thrown myself into family, making sure grandmother never felt alone. When should I read this? I held up the envelope. Whenever you're ready. But Sarah? He leaned forward slightly. Your grandmother was very concerned about something Victoria had done, something that happened in March just before she changed her will. Whatever's in that letter, it was important enough to make her reconsider everything she'd planned for her estate. I nodded, tucking the letter into my purse next to the keys to grandmother's house. My house now. The thought still felt surreal. There's one more thing, Mr. Blackwood said, pulling out a smaller envelope. She left this for you separately. She said to give it to you after Victoria left. This envelope was smaller, my name written in shakier handwriting, as if grandmother's hands had been trembling when she wrote it. Inside was a single key attached to a small silver tag. Safety deposit box? I asked. Mr. Blackwood shook his head. Your grandmother said you'd know what it opened when the time was right. I drove to grandmother's house in a daze, the familiar tree-lined streets of my childhood passing by like scenes from someone else's life. The white colonial at 47 Maple Street looked exactly as it had when I'd left it this morning, before everything changed. The garden grandmother had tended so carefully was beginning to show signs of my inexperienced care, but the roses she'd planted were still blooming. I sat in my car for a long time, looking at the house that was now mine, holding the letter that would explain why. Through the front window, I could see the living room where I'd spent countless hours reading to grandmother, where we'd watched old movies together, where she'd taught me to knit during the long winter months of her treatment. Victoria's car, wasn't in the driveway, but I could see her distinctive silver BMW parked across the street. She was watching, waiting, probably hoping I'd invite her in to read the letter together. Part of me, the part that still remembered building blanket forts together as children, wanted to do exactly that. But the larger part of me, the part that had learned to read the subtle signs of grandmother's pain and adjust her medication accordingly, the part that had held her hand while she struggled to breathe in those final weeks, he knew that some truths needed to be faced alone first. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the house that still smelled faintly of grandmother's lavender perfume and the lemon oil she used on the antique furniture. In the living room, everything was exactly as we'd left it. Her reading chair by the window, the small table beside it with her magnifying glass and the book we'd been reading together, a mystery novel she'd never gotten to finish. I sat in her chair and opened the first letter, the one Mr. Blackwood had given me in front of Victoria. Grandmother's handwriting was careful, deliberate. My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have learned about your inheritance. I imagine Victoria was not pleased. I'm sorry for that, but not sorry for my decision. You may wonder why I chose to leave the bulk of my estate to you rather than dividing it equally. The answer is simple. Love is not measured in time spent at charity galas or Christmas visits that last exactly 2 hours. Love is measured in the countless small acts of devotion you showed me every day. You rearranged your life to care for me. You gave up promotions at work, social opportunities, perhaps even romantic relationships, to ensure I was never alone in my illness. You never once complained, never once made me feel like a burden. That kind of love deserves to be honored. But there is another reason, one that will be difficult for you to learn. In March, Victoria came to visit me. She brought legal documents she wanted me to sign, papers that would have given her power of attorney over all my affairs. She told me that my illness was affecting my judgment, that I needed someone with business experience to manage my finances. I refused, of course. But what disturbed me most was what she said when she thought I was asleep. She was on the phone, in my kitchen, talking to someone about how much longer the doctors expected me to live, about the value of this house, about her plans for the antique shop. She spoke about my death as if it were a business transaction she was waiting to close. I realized then that Victoria saw my illness not as a tragedy to be endured together, but as an inconvenience that was delaying her inheritance. The grandmother she visited was not a person to be cherished in her final months, but an asset to be managed until liquidation. I changed my will the next week. My hands were shaking as I read the words. I thought about that March visit, how Victoria had seemed unusually interested in grandmother's medical appointments, how she'd asked detailed questions about her finances. At the time, I'd been grateful for her involvement. I'd thought she was finally stepping up to help with grandmother's care. I know this will be painful for you to learn. Despite everything, you love your sister. But you deserve to know why I made the choice I did. Victoria chose money over family long before I chose family over money. Use the inheritance wisely, my dear. Not just the money, but the lesson that comes with it. True wealth is measured in the depth of our relationships, not the breadth of our bank accounts. The second key I left you opens the cedar chest in my bedroom closet. Inside, you will find the complete documentation of Victoria's visit in March, including a recording I made of her phone conversation. I never intended to use it against her, but I wanted you to have the full truth. I also want you to know that the foundation idea came from watching you care for me. You have a gift for making people feel valued and loved. Don't waste it on someone who will never appreciate it. All my love, Grandmother. I sat in the gathering dusk of the living room, the letter in my lap, feeling as if the floor had shifted beneath me. Outside, Victoria's car was still parked across the street, and I could see her silhouette in the driver's seat. She was waiting, probably assuming I'd call her in once I'd read Grandmother's explanation. probably expecting that family loyalty would override whatever grandmother had revealed. But as I climbed the stairs to grandmother's bedroom, I knew that some betrayals changed everything forever. The cedar chest was exactly where grandmother had said it would be, locked with the small key from Mr. Blackwood's office. Inside, beneath layers of tissue paper and sachets of lavender, I found a thick manila folder. The recording device was small, modern, something grandmother must have purchased specifically for this purpose. The timestamp showed March 18th, 3 days after the will had been dated. Grandmother had been thorough, just as Mr. Blackwood had said. I pressed play and heard my sister's voice, crystal clear, discussing my grandmother's life expectancy with someone she called the appraiser. They were scheduling a time for him to evaluate the house and its contents, talking about the best way to liquidate the antique collection, debating whether to sell the property immediately or hold it as a rental investment. "The old woman can't last much longer," Victoria's voice said with casual certainty. "The doctors give her 6 months at most. Sarah's playing nursemaid, so she's completely distracted. This is the perfect time to get everything in order, the Recording continued for another 10 minutes, Victoria discussing funeral arrangements, estate sale logistics, and her plans to convince me to sell the house quickly so we could split the proceeds. She talked about our grandmother as if she were already dead, as if her death were simply another business opportunity to be managed efficiently. I turned off the device and sat in the silence of grandmother's bedroom, surrounded by the furniture, and photographs and small treasures of a life well lived. This was the woman Victoria had been discussing like a commodity to be liquidated. This room, where I'd spent so many hours reading aloud, bringing tea, adjusting pillows, and simply sitting quietly while grandmother rested, had been nothing more than an investment property in Victoria's mind. My phone buzzed with a text message from Victoria. "Can we talk? I'm outside." I looked out the bedroom window and saw her getting out of her car, her expression determined. She was coming to the front door, probably expecting that I'd let her in, that we'd discuss this like reasonable adults, that I'd be willing to share the inheritance because that's what family does. But family, I realized, was what I'd been doing for the past 18 months. Family was what grandmother had recognized and rewarded. Victoria's version of family was what she'd been planning in March, a transaction with an inevitable profitable conclusion. I walked downstairs and opened the front door before she could knock. "Sarah," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "we need to talk about this will. It's clearly not what grandmother intended." "Actually," I said, my voice steadier than I'd expected, "it's exactly what she intended." Victoria stepped forward, assuming I'd invite her in, but I remained in the doorway. "Look, I know you're upset about some things I might have said or done," she began, "but we're family. We can work this out. Maybe we can split everything 50-50, like it should have been from the beginning." "Like the phone call you made from grandmother's kitchen in March?" I asked quietly. Victoria's confident expression faltered. "What phone call?" "The one where you discussed her life expectancy with an appraiser. The one where you called her the old woman and said she couldn't last much longer." For the first time in years, my older sister looked genuinely afraid. "Sarah, you don't understand. I was just trying to be practical to plan ahead." "You were planning her funeral while she was still alive," I said. "You were pricing her belongings while she was still using them." Victoria's face flushed red, then went pale again. "It's not what it sounds like. I was trying to protect both of us, to make sure we'd be prepared when the time came." "The time came and went," I interrupted. "And you weren't here for any of it. You weren't here for the midnight trips to the emergency room or the mornings, when she couldn't remember where she was, or the afternoon when she cried because she was afraid of dying alone. I had responsibilities." "So did I. But I chose her." Victoria stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. The mask of concern and family feeling fell away, revealing something harder underneath. "You always were. Self-righteous," she said, her voice sharp with anger. "Acting like you're so noble for playing caregiver while I was building a real life. Well, congratulations, Sarah. You manipulated a sick old woman into giving you everything. I hope you're proud of yourself." The accusation hit me like a physical blow, not because it was true, but because it revealed exactly what Victoria thought of me, of grandmother, of everything I'd done for the past year and a half. "Get off my property," I said quietly. Victoria's eyes widened. "Sarah, I didn't mean—" "Get off my property," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "And don't come back unless you're ready to apologize not to me, but to grandmother's memory." She stared at me for another moment, perhaps realizing for the first time that the quiet little sister she'd always been able to manage and dismiss had found her backbone. Then she turned and walked back to her car without another word. I watched her drive away, then closed and locked the door. The house felt different now, not like grandmother's house where I was a temporary caretaker, but like my house, my sanctuary, my inheritance in every sense of the word. That night, I made myself dinner in the kitchen where Victoria had made her calculating phone call, and I ate it at the table where grandmother and I had shared so many meals together. I raised my glass of wine to her empty chair and whispered, "Thank you for seeing the truth." The inheritance was mine, but more than that, the lesson was mine. That love freely given is always returned, that loyalty matters more than success, and that sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who understand us least. But as I settled into grandmother's reading chair with a cup of tea and the mystery novel she'd never finished, I realized the story was far from over. Victoria would be back. People like Victoria always came back when money was involved. And when she did, I would be ready with the truth she didn't want to hear and the evidence she didn't know existed. The second page of this story was just beginning. 3 days after Victoria left my driveway, the first attorney's letter arrived. Henderson, Mills & Associates, not Derek's law firm, but the kind of aggressive litigation practice that specialized in breaking wills and destroying families in the process. The letterhead alone probably cost more than my monthly salary at the library. I sat at grandmother's kitchen table, my kitchen table now, reading the formal language that essentially accused me of elder abuse, undue influence, and manipulation of a mentally incompetent person. They were demanding a psychiatric evaluation of grandmother's mental state during her final months, a full audit of her finances during the period I'd been her caregiver, and immediate suspension of all inheritance transfers pending a complete investigation. My hands shook as I read the accusations. According to Victoria's attorneys, I had isolated our grandmother from family, controlled her access to information, and coerced her into changing her will through emotional manipulation. They were painting me as a predator who had taken advantage of a vulnerable elderly woman. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. I was being accused of the very behavior Victoria had exhibited, treating grandmother as an asset to be managed rather than a person to be loved. My phone rang as I finished reading. Unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Sarah, this is Dr. Patricia Henley. I was your grandmother's primary care physician." I recognized the name from all the medical appointments I'd driven grandmother to over the past year. "Dr. Henley, hello. Is everything all right? I received a rather disturbing call this morning from attorneys representing your sister. They're requesting all of your grandmother's medical records, claiming there are questions about her mental competency during her final months." My stomach dropped. "I see. Sarah, I want you to know that I told them exactly what I'm going to tell you. Your grandmother was completely lucid and mentally sharp until the very end. Yes, the cancer treatments made her physically weak, and yes, she had some difficult days, but her mind was clear. I have detailed notes from every appointment documenting her mental acuity. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by anger that such documentation was even necessary. Thank you for calling to tell me. There's something else. Your sister's attorney asked specifically about any signs of coercion or undue influence from family members. I told him that in my professional opinion, the only family member who might have been exhibiting concerning behavior was Victoria herself. What do you mean? Dr. Henley was quiet for a moment. During that appointment in March, Victoria accompanied your grandmother for the first time in months. She spent the entire visit asking about prognosis, life expectancy, quality of life decisions. Your grandmother was clearly uncomfortable with the questions, and after Victoria left the room, she specifically asked me not to discuss her medical information with Victoria anymore. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Did you document that request? Of course. And I honored it. When Victoria called my office twice in April asking for updates on your grandmother's condition, I refused to provide any information without written consent from the patient. After Dr. Henley hung up, I sat staring at the legal papers scattered across the kitchen table. Victoria wasn't just challenging the will. She was trying to destroy my reputation and my relationship with grandmother's memory in the process. But she had made a crucial mistake. She was fighting a battle based on lies against someone who had been meticulously documenting the truth. I called Mr. Blackwood's office and made an appointment for the following morning. Then I went upstairs to grandmother's bedroom and opened the cedar chest again. If Victoria wanted a war, she was going to get one, but it would be fought with her own weapons. The next morning, Mr. Blackwood's office felt different. Instead of the peaceful formality of the will reading, there was an electric tension in the air. Mr. Blackwood himself looked tired, older than he had just a few days earlier. I received a copy of the challenge to your grandmother's will, he said without preamble. It's quite aggressive. It's also completely false, I replied, setting the manila folder from grandmother's cedar chest on his desk. But I think you should hear this before we discuss our response. I played the recording of Victoria's phone call for him. His expression grew increasingly grim as Victoria's voice filled the office, discussing our living grandmother as if she were already dead, calculating the value of her possessions, planning the liquidation of her life's work. When the recording ended, Mr. Blackwood leaned back in his chair. My God, Eleanor played this for me when she changed her will, but hearing it again, he shook his head. Your sister has quite possibly committed a felony. What do you mean? Attempting to gain power of attorney through fraud, elder abuse, financial exploitation. There are several potential charges here. But more immediately relevant, this recording proves that Victoria's challenge to the will is based on projection. She's accusing you of exactly what she attempted to do. I felt a moment of satisfaction, followed immediately by sadness. Victoria had forced this confrontation, but I was the one who would have to destroy our family to win it. What are our options? Mr. Blackwood opened a thick file. Your grandmother anticipated this exact scenario. She left very specific instructions for how to handle a will challenge from Victoria. He pulled out a sealed envelope marked with my name and today's date. She said to give this to you only if Victoria chose to fight rather than accept the inheritance as given. Inside the envelope was another letter, this one shorter but somehow more devastating than the first. Sarah, if you're reading this, Victoria has chosen greed over family. I'm sorry you have to learn the full truth this way, but you need to know exactly who your sister has become. The recording you found was not the only documentation I made of Victoria's behavior. Over the past 2 years, as my illness progressed, Victoria made several attempts to gain control of my finances. Each time, I documented her efforts. In January, she brought papers for me to sign that would have given her access to my investment, accounts in case of emergency. When I refused, she suggested that my illness was affecting my judgment and that I should consider moving to a care facility where professionals could manage my affairs. In February, she contacted my banker directly, claiming to be calling on my behalf to discuss my account status. When the bank refused to provide information, she threatened to report them for not recognizing a family member's legitimate concerns about elder abuse. The March incident was simply the final straw. Victoria has been systematically attempting to strip me of my autonomy and my assets for months. If she is now challenging my will, it's because she believes she can convince a court that I was incompetent when I explicitly rejected her attempts to control me. Use this information as you see fit. But remember, Sarah, sometimes protecting yourself requires destroying someone else's lies, even when that someone is family. Your grandmother attached to the letter were copies of bank correspondence, emails Victoria had sent to grandmothers, financial advisor, and transcripts of voicemails Victoria had left with the investment company managing grandmother's portfolio. It was a pattern of behavior that painted a clear picture of financial elder abuse, or at least attempted abuse. "There's more," Mr. Blackwood said quietly. He handed me another document. "Your grandmother hired a private investigator in April to document Victoria's behavior and financial situation. The investigator's report was thorough and damning. Victoria's marketing company was struggling. She'd taken out several business loans using her expected inheritance as collateral. She'd made commitments to investors based on projected capital infusion from family assets. Her perfect life was built on a foundation of money she didn't yet have from a grandmother who was still alive. She needed grandmother to die," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. Her entire business plan depended on the inheritance. "It appears so, and when your grandmother refused to give her early access to the money, Victoria began trying to prove incompetency so she could petition for guardianship." I stared at the documents, feeling sick. My sister hadn't just been planning for grandmother's death. She'd been actively working to accelerate it by forcing her into a care facility where the stress and isolation might hasten her decline. "What do we do with this information?" Mr. Blackwood's expression was carefully neutral, but I could see the distaste in his eyes. "We could file a counter-complaint alleging attempted elder abuse and fraud. We could also report Victoria's behavior to the district attorney's office for investigation. But Sarah, once we start down this path, there's no going back. This will destroy any possibility of reconciliation with your sister." I thought about Victoria's words on my doorstep. "You manipulated a sick old woman into giving you everything." She had accused me of the crimes she herself had attempted to commit. She had launched a legal attack designed to destroy my reputation and steal money that was never hers to begin with. She destroyed the possibility of reconciliation when she tried to have grandmother declared incompetent. I said, "File the counter-complaint." The war between Victoria and me played out over the next 6 weeks in a series of legal maneuvers that would have impressed grandmother's love of strategic thinking. Victoria's attorneys demanded depositions from everyone who had contact with grandmother during her final months. I provided them gladly. Dr. Henley, the nurses from the cancer center, the home health aide who came twice a week, the pharmacist who delivered grandmother's medications, even the grocery delivery service that had gotten to know us both. Every single person testified to the same thing. Grandmother was mentally sharp, completely in control of her decisions, and clearly devoted to me while expressing frustration with Victoria's absence and demands. Victoria's case began to crumble when her own evidence started working against her. The psychiatric evaluation she'd demanded revealed that grandmother had specifically discussed her will with Dr. Henley, expressing concern about Victoria's unhealthy interest in her finances. The financial audit showed that every penny of grandmother's money during my caregiving period had been spent on her medical care, household expenses, or set aside in savings. I hadn't benefited financially in any way from caring for her. But the killing blow came when Victoria's own attorney withdrew from the case, was in Mr. Blackwood's office reviewing deposition transcripts when his secretary announced that Henderson, Mills and Associates was on the phone. Mr. Blackwood put the call on speaker. Mr. Blackwood, this is James Henderson. I'm calling to inform you that we are withdrawing our representation of Victoria Henderson in the matter of the Whitmore estate. May I ask why? There was a long pause. Our client failed to disclose material information about her relationship with the deceased. Information that came to light during our preparation that makes her claims untenable. We cannot, in good conscience, continue to represent her. After the call ended, Mr. Blackwood and I sat in silence for a moment. What do you think she failed to disclose? I asked. Probably the recording, or the private investigator's report, or the documented attempts to gain power of attorney. He shook his head. Her attorneys realized they were arguing that an elderly woman was incompetent to change her will, specifically because she refused to let her granddaughter take financial control, while simultaneously having evidence that the granddaughter had been trying to do exactly that for months. 2 days later, Victoria called me directly for the first time since our confrontation on my doorstep. Sarah, we need to talk. Her voice was different, smaller, without the confidence and superiority that had characterized our relationship for years. Do we? My attorneys dropped me. I can't afford to hire new ones. Not good ones anyway. She was quiet for a moment. I know what you think of me now. I think you tried to steal from a dying woman who loved you. It wasn't like that. But her voice lacked conviction. I was trying to protect her assets, to make sure everything was handled properly when the time came. The time came, Victoria. And you weren't there. Another long silence. What do you want? To destroy me completely? To ruin my business and my marriage and my reputation? I realized in that moment that I held all the power. I had evidence that could send Victoria to prison for attempted elder abuse. I had documentation that could destroy her business and her marriage. I could take away everything she valued the way she had tried to take away everything grandmother valued. But sitting in grandmother's kitchen, surrounded by the quiet peace of the home where I'd learned about love and loyalty, and the difference between the two, I found I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice, but not destruction. I want you to admit what you did, I said finally, to me and to grandmother's memory. I want you to acknowledge that you tried to take advantage of a sick old woman for money. And if I do, then I'll settle the will challenge without involving the criminal allegations. Victoria was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. You win, she said finally. You get everything and I get nothing. Is that it? You get the $50,000 grandmother left you, plus her jewelry collection. That's not nothing, Victoria. For most people, that would be generous. It's not enough to save my business. Then maybe you shouldn't have built your business on money that wasn't yours. After I hung up, I sat at the kitchen table looking at the legal documents that represented weeks of warfare between sisters who had once built blanket forts together. The fight was over, but the victory felt hollow. I had protected grandmother's wishes and my own inheritance, but I had also lost my sister forever. That evening, Victoria came to the house one final time. She looked older, exhausted, defeated, in a way I'd never seen before. I let her in, and we sat in the living room where grandmother had spent her final months. I'm sorry, Victoria said without looking at me. Not for fighting the will, I still think you influenced her. But I'm sorry for the things I said about her dying, about liquidating her things. I was scared. Scared of what? I set down my coffee and gave him my full attention. Marcus was not someone who panicked easily. Someone has been making inquiries about the foundation's finances. Official inquiries from the IRS. My blood turned cold. What kind of inquiries? They're questioning our tax-exempt status. Specifically, they're suggesting that the foundation was established as a tax avoidance scheme rather than a legitimate charity. Marcus paused. Sarah, they have detailed financial records of your grandmother's estate. Someone provided them with documentation suggesting that the foundation was created to hide assets from estate taxes. I sank into my chair. That's impossible. Everything was done legally through proper channels. I know that, and you know that. But someone has convinced the IRS that there's smoke here worth investigating. They're launching a full audit of both the foundation and your personal finances. After Marcus hung up, I sat staring at the wall of my office, trying to process what I'd just heard. The foundation was legitimate. I had the paperwork to prove it. But an IRS audit could destroy us regardless of our innocence. The legal fees alone would drain our resources, and the negative publicity would make it impossible to continue our work. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Heard about your tax troubles. Karma's a bitch, isn't it? V. Victoria. Of course. Called Mr. Blackwood immediately. I was wondering when she'd make her next move, he said after I explained the situation. Your sister is more resourceful than I gave her credit for. Can she do this? Can she just sick the IRS on us? Anyone can file a complaint with the IRS. And if that complaint comes with detailed financial records and a compelling narrative about tax fraud, he sighed. Yes, she can do exactly what she's done. But we haven't committed tax fraud. No. But proving that will require a comprehensive audit that could take months and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Even if we win, the foundation's reputation will be damaged beyond repair. I felt the familiar surge of anger that had become my constant companion since grandmother's death. Victoria had lost the will contest, but she wasn't finished destroying what our grandmother had built. If she couldn't have the inheritance, she was determined to make sure I couldn't keep it either. That evening, I drove to the house where this all began, needing the peace of grandmother's garden to think clearly. The roses had been dormant since the first frost, but I'd learned to find beauty in the bare branches and promise of spring renewal. I was surprised to find Derek's car in my driveway. He was waiting on the front porch, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen him. Victoria's husband had always been the diplomatic one in their marriage, the calm counterpoint to her intensity. But tonight, he looked like a man who'd reached the end of his patience. Sarah, I need to talk to you. I unlocked the front door and led him into the living room where this family drama had begun months earlier. He declined my offer of coffee and sat heavily on the couch. Victoria doesn't know I'm here, he said without preamble. She thinks I'm at a client dinner. Why are you here, Derek? He was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Because I can't watch her destroy herself anymore, and I can't be complicit in what she's doing to you. What exactly is she doing to me? Derek pulled out his phone and showed me a series of text messages. Victoria had been in contact with someone named Jennifer Walsh, describing herself as a concerned family member, reporting suspicious financial activity by the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation. Jennifer Walsh is an IRS investigator Victoria met at a tax law seminar last month, Derek explained. Victoria has been feeding her information about your grandmother's estate, suggesting that the foundation was created to avoid estate taxes and that you've been using foundation funds for personal expenses. That's completely false. I know that. But Victoria has been very creative with her presentation of the facts. He scrolled through more messages. She's provided bank statements showing large transfers from your grandmother's accounts to foundation accounts, but she's left out the timeline showing these transfers happened after your grandmother's death. She's shown your salary from the foundation, but she's suggested it's payment for minimal work rather than legitimate compensation. I felt sick. Victoria had taken legitimate financial transactions and created a narrative of fraud around them. Why are you telling me this? Derek looked up at me, and I saw something I'd never seen before in his eyes. Shame. Because I've been watching my wife become someone I don't recognize. The will challenge was bad enough, but this... He shook his head. She's so consumed with getting what she thinks she deserves that she's willing to destroy you in the process. And You're okay with that? No. His voice was firm. I'm not okay with any of it. I tried to stop her from filing the complaint with the IRS, but she wouldn't listen. She said you needed to learn that actions have consequences. I leaned back in grandmother's chair, trying to process this latest betrayal. Victoria wasn't just trying to take my inheritance anymore. She was trying to destroy my life's work, to ruin the foundation that was helping real people in real need. What does she want, Derek? Really? She wants you to fail. She wants the foundation to collapse so she can say she was right about your grandmother's will being a mistake. He met my eyes. But mostly, she wants to hurt you the way she feels you've hurt her. Derek stayed for another hour, providing details about Victoria's campaign against the foundation. She'd been meticulous, documenting every financial transaction, every business decision, every potential vulnerability. But her obsession with destroying me had made her careless in other ways. After Derek left, I sat alone in the house that had become my sanctuary, feeling the weight of Victoria's latest attack. The IRS audit would be devastating even if we ultimately prevailed. The legal fees would drain the foundation's resources, and the negative publicity would make our work impossible to continue. But as I looked around the living room where I'd cared for grandmother through her final illness, where I'd learned about love and loyalty and the difference between family and blood relatives, I realized something important. Victoria had made a crucial mistake. She was fighting a war against someone who no longer cared about winning. I cared about protecting what mattered. The next morning, I called an emergency meeting with Marcus and our legal counsel. If Victoria wanted to escalate this conflict, I was ready to meet her at whatever level she chose. We have several options, said Rebecca Martinez, the attorney who'd been handling the foundation's legal affairs. We can comply with the audit and hope for the best. We can challenge the audit on procedural grounds, or... She paused, looking uncomfortable. Or what? We can go on the offensive. If we can prove that the IRS complaint was filed maliciously, with false information, we can pursue criminal charges for filing a false report to a federal agency. Marcus leaned forward. What would we need to prove that? Evidence that Victoria knew her allegations were false when she made them. Evidence that she deliberately misrepresented facts to create the appearance of wrongdoing. Rebecca looked at me directly. Do you have anything like that? I thought about the recording device in grandmother's cedar chest, about the documentation of Victoria's attempts to gain power of attorney, about Derek's phone showing Victoria's text messages to the IRS investigator. Yes, I said, I have exactly that. 3 days later, I sat across from Jennifer Walsh in a conference room at the IRS regional office. She was younger than I'd expected, with the kind of aggressive competence that had probably gotten her promoted quickly through the federal bureaucracy. Ms. Caldwell, I appreciate you coming in voluntarily, she said, opening a thick file. As you know, we've received information suggesting irregularities in the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation's financial structure. I'm aware of the allegations, I replied. I'm also aware of who made them and why. Ms. Walsh raised an eyebrow. The source of the complaint isn't relevant to our investigation. It is when the complaint is based on deliberately falsified information. I placed a USB drive on the table between us. I'd like you to listen to something. The recording of Victoria's phone call from March played in the sterile conference room. Ms. Walsh's expression grew increasingly troubled as Victoria's voice filled the space, discussing our grandmother's death as a business opportunity, calculating the value of her possessions, planning the liquidation of her life's work. When the recording ended, Ms. Walsh was quiet for a long moment. The woman on this recording is the same person who filed the complaint about the foundation, I said. Victoria Henderson, my sister. She's been trying to gain control of my grandmother's assets since before she died, and when that failed, she decided to destroy what my grandmother created instead. I handed Ms. Walsh a printed timeline showing Victoria's behavior over the past year. The attempts to gain power of attorney, the failed will challenge, the business loans secured against, expected inheritance, and finally, the IRS complaint filed with deliberately misleading information. Ms. Henderson told you that foundation funds were being used for personal expenses, I continued. What she didn't tell you is that my salary is set by the board at market rates for nonprofit directors, that every expenditure is documented and approved, and that I actually earn less now than I did in my previous job. Ms. Walsh was taking notes rapidly. You're alleging that Ms. Henderson knowingly filed a false complaint? I'm stating that she filed a complaint based on partial information presented in a deliberately misleading way. I handed her another document. These are the bank records she provided to you, showing transfers from my grandmother's estate to foundation accounts. Here are the complete records, showing the timeline and legal documentation for each transfer. The difference was stark. Victoria's version suggested ongoing financial manipulation during grandmother's lifetime. The complete records showed legitimate estate transfers executed after grandmother's death according to her will. Why would your sister file a false complaint against you? I met Ms. Walsh's eyes directly. Because she attempted to commit elder abuse against our grandmother, failed, lost her inheritance as a result, and is now trying to destroy what our grandmother built out of spite. Ms. Walsh closed the file and leaned back in her chair. Ms. Caldwell, based on what you've shown me today, I'm recommending that the audit of your foundation be suspended pending an investigation into the source of the original complaint. What does that mean for Victoria? It means that filing a false report to a federal agency is a serious crime. If our investigation confirms that Ms. Henderson knowingly provided false information to initiate this audit, she could face federal charges. I felt no satisfaction in Victoria's impending downfall, only exhaustion. Every time I thought the war was over, she found a new battlefield. But perhaps, finally, there would be consequences for her actions that went beyond family drama. The call came 2 weeks later while I was reviewing applications for foundation grants. Derek's voice was strained, barely controlled. Sarah, Victoria's been arrested. I set down my pen and gave him my full attention. When? This morning. Federal. Agents came to the house with a warrant. They charged her with filing false statements to a federal agency and obstruction of a federal investigation. His voice broke slightly. She's looking at up to 5 years in prison. Derek, I'm sorry. No, don't apologize. This is what she chose. Every step of the way, she chose revenge over family, destruction over healing. He was quiet for a moment. I filed for divorce yesterday. The finality of it hit me like a physical blow. Victoria had lost everything. Her inheritance, her business, her marriage, and now potentially her freedom. Because she couldn't accept that love and loyalty had been valued over financial success. Is there anything I can do? Derek laughed, bitterly. You could drop the charges, but we both know she'd just find another way to attack you. Victoria doesn't know how to stop fighting, even when she's already lost. That evening, I drove to the cemetery where grandmother was buried. Her headstone was simple granite with her name, dates, and a single line. She chose love over everything else. I sat on the bench beside her grave and told her about Victoria's arrest, about the foundation's survival, about the strange hollow victory that felt more like defeat. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. I protected what you built, I said to the headstone. But I lost my sister in the process. The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and for a moment, I could almost hear grandmother's voice. Sometimes protecting what you love requires losing what you thought you wanted to keep. Victoria pled guilty to filing false statements in Pamkiao, exchange for a reduced sentence of 18 months in federal prison. Her business collapsed within weeks of her arrest, unable to survive the scandal and her absence. Derek moved to California for a fresh start, sending me his new address with a note. In case you ever want to talk to someone who knew Victoria before she became this person. The foundation thrived, Without the cloud of IRS investigation, we expanded our services and opened a second location. Local media covered our work, praising the innovative approach to eldercare support. I was invited to speak at conferences, to serve on committees, to become the public face of a movement I'd never intended to start. But on quiet evenings in grandmother's house, I sometimes wondered what would have happened if Victoria had simply accepted the inheritance as given, if she'd chosen family over money, if she'd learned the lesson grandmother had tried to teach us both, that true wealth is measured in the depth of our relationships, not the breadth of our bank accounts. The inheritance was mine, completely and finally. The lesson was mine too. That sometimes the price of protecting what you love is losing everything you thought you wanted to keep. But that some things, truth, justice, love freely given, are worth any price. As I turned off the lights in grandmother's house and climbed the stairs to my bedroom, I realized that the story grandmother had begun with her will was finally complete. Not the story she'd hoped to tell, perhaps, but the story that needed to be told. That character matters more than blood, that loyalty is earned rather than inherited, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to enable someone else's destruction of themselves. The inheritance was mine, but more importantly, I was finally, truly free. 2 years after Victoria's sentencing, I thought I had finally found peace. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation was thriving, serving over 300 elderly clients across 2 locations. I had testified before the state legislature about eldercare reform, been featured in national magazines as an innovator in nonprofit management, and built a life that honored grandmother's memory in ways I'd never imagined possible. That's why the letter that arrived on a snowy February morning felt like a message from another lifetime. The return address was Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury. Victoria's handwriting had changed during her imprisonment, smaller, more careful, lacking the bold strokes that had once signed million-dollar contracts. Sarah, I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I wouldn't blame you if you threw this letter away without reading it. But I'm being released next month, and there are things I need to say before I return to a world where you've become someone I no longer recognize. Prison changes you. Not in the way movies suggest. I wasn't hardened or brutalized. I was diminished, reduced to the essence of who I really am beneath all the designer clothes and business success and social connections. What I found there wasn't pretty. I've had 2 years to think about everything that happened, and I've come to understand something that will probably sound like self-serving bullshit to you. I never hated you. I hated what you represented. You were everything I thought I was supposed to be but couldn't manage to become. Kind without calculation, loyal without expectation of return, successful at the things that actually matter. I spent so much energy trying to prove I was worthy of love that I forgot how to actually love anyone. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I want you to know that I understand now why grandmother chose you. It wasn't because you manipulated her or because I failed her. It was because you became the person she hoped we'd both become, and I became someone she didn't recognize. I'm going to be released to a halfway house in Springfield. I won't contact you again after this letter. But I wanted you to know that destroying you didn't make me feel better about losing everything. It just made me lose more. I hope you're happy. I hope the foundation is everything grandmother wanted it to be. I hope you found peace in that house full of memories. Victoria P.S. There's something else you should know. Something I never told anyone. The night before grandmother's birthday dinner in Rome, she called me. She told me she knew about the recording, about the legal papers, about everything. She said she was giving me one last chance to do the right thing, to apologize and accept whatever inheritance she'd planned for me originally. I hung up on her. I was so angry that she'd been spying on me that I couldn't see she was offering me redemption. By the time we got to that restaurant, she'd already decided exactly how the evening would unfold. The missing chair wasn't an oversight or a family conspiracy. It was her final test, and I failed it completely. I read the letter 3 times before, setting it down on the kitchen table where so many revelations had unfolded over the past 2.5 years. Victoria's words carried the weight of genuine remorse, but they also revealed something I'd never known. Grandmother had orchestrated that night in Rome with the same careful planning I'd witnessed in her final months. She had known about Victoria's betrayal and given her a chance to make it right. When Victoria chose pride over humility, Grandmother had responded with the missing chair, not as casual cruelty, but as a public demonstration of a choice Victoria had already made. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Dr. Patricia Henley's name appeared on the screen. "Sarah, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. I have some news that might interest you." "Of course, Dr. Henley. How can I help you?" "I'm retiring next month after 40 years of practice. I've been going through my files, and I found something that belonged to your grandmother. She asked me to keep it safe and give it to you, but only after Victoria's legal troubles were resolved." Another secret. After all this time, Grandmother was still revealing layers of her plan. "What kind of something?" "A safety deposit box key and a letter. She said you'd understand when you were ready." I met Dr. Henley at her office that afternoon. She handed me a manila envelope sealed with wax, my name written across the front in Grandmother's handwriting along with a date. Today's date, February 15th. How did she know to write today's date? I asked. Dr. Henley smiled sadly. "Your grandmother was a remarkable woman. She seemed to understand timing in ways that defied logic. She told me to give this to you exactly 2 years after Victoria's sentencing, unless Victoria contacted you first. In that case, I was to give it to you within 24 hours of Victoria's letter arriving." She knew Victoria would write to me? She said Victoria would need to make one final attempt at connection before she could truly let go. Your grandmother understood people, Sarah, especially the people she loved. Inside the envelope was another key, and a letter dated the day before Grandmother's death. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, Victoria has completed her prison sentence and reached out to you in some way. I hope her time away has given her the perspective she needed to understand what she lost and why. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at Commonwealth Bank downtown. Box 247. Inside, you'll find documents that will complete the picture of everything that happened during my final year. I want you to know that every choice I made, the will, the inheritance, even that terrible dinner in Rome, was designed to teach both my granddaughters a lesson about love and consequences. Victoria needed to learn that actions have results that extend far beyond immediate gratification. You needed to learn that standing up for yourself doesn't make you selfish. But there's something else you need to know, something I couldn't tell you while Victoria was still fighting the lessons I was trying to teach her. The foundation I created through my will was never the end goal. It was the beginning. In the safety deposit box, you'll find the deeds to 3 properties I purchased quietly over the past 5 years. A former nursing home in Brookline, an abandoned community center in Cambridge, and a small apartment building in Somerville. You'll also find architectural plans, business projections, and a detailed proposal for expanding the Eleanor Whitmore Foundation into a comprehensive elder care network. I've been planning this expansion since the day I was diagnosed with cancer. The initial inheritance was just seed money. The real gift is the infrastructure to build something that will outlast both of us. But Sarah, and this is important, this expansion can only work if you choose it freely. If you're content with the foundation as it is, sell the properties and use the money however you wish. The choice is yours, not mine. I've given you the tools, but I won't control how you use them. There's one final thing in the box. A letter from Victoria, written 6 months before my death. It will be painful for you to read, but you need to understand who your sister was. Before she became consumed with inheritance and money, she wasn't always the person who made those terrible choices. I love you both, but I trust only you to carry forward the work that matters. Your grandmother. I drove to the bank in a daze, my mind reeling with the implications of grandmother's final revelation. She had been planning a comprehensive elder care network while I was learning to manage her medications. She had been quietly assembling the foundation for an empire of compassion, while Victoria was calculating the value of antique furniture. The safety deposit box was larger than I'd expected, filled with documents that represented years of careful planning. The 3 properties were worth nearly $2 million combined, but more importantly, they were strategically located to serve different communities throughout the metropolitan area. The architectural plans were breathtaking. The former nursing home could be converted into a residential facility for elderly people transitioning from hospital care to independent living. The community center could become a hub for social services, meal programs, and educational activities. The apartment building could provide affordable housing for seniors on fixed incomes. It was a vision of elder care that addressed every gap I'd identified during my 2 years running the foundation. It was also a business plan that would require every skill I'd developed, every connection I'd made, and every lesson I'd learned about turning compassion into sustainable action. At the bottom of the box was Victoria's letter, exactly as grandmother had described. It was dated 8 months before the Rome trip, written on Henderson marketing letterhead. Dear grandmother, I know I haven't been visiting as often as I should. The business has been demanding, and Derek and I have been discussing starting a family soon. But I want you to know that I think about you constantly. Sarah mentioned that you've been feeling unwell lately. I hope it's nothing serious, but if you need anything, help with appointments, someone to drive you places, assistance managing your affairs, please call me. I know Sarah is wonderful company, but she doesn't have experience with financial planning or healthcare advocacy. I'd be happy to help coordinate your care. I also want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've taught me about business and independence. The success of Henderson Marketing is built on principles you instilled in me about hard work and determination. When the time comes, I hope to honor your memory by using my inheritance to expand the business and maybe establish a scholarship fund in your name. I love you, and I'm sorry I can't be there more often. Victoria. I read the letter twice, searching for signs of the calculating woman who had recorded conversations about liquidating assets. Instead, I found someone who sounded genuinely caring, if misguided about where her help was needed. The transformation from this concerned granddaughter to the woman who hung up on grandmother's final offer of redemption was stark. Somewhere, in the months between this letter and the Rome dinner, Victoria had lost herself in the pursuit of financial security. That evening, I spread all of grandmother's documents across my dining room table and studied the scope of her vision. The elder care network she'd envisioned would serve thousands of people, provide dozens of jobs, and create a sustainable model for aging with dignity. It was ambitious beyond anything I'd imagined possible. It was also exactly the kind of project that would require the skills Victoria had developed in business expansion and project management. The thought hit me like a physical blow. Grandmother hadn't just been planning an elder care network, she'd been planning a way for both her granddaughters to contribute their unique strengths to something larger than themselves. Victoria's business acumen and my compassionate caregiving could have created something extraordinary together. But that partnership had become impossible the moment Victoria chose money over family, calculation over love, or had it. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Derek's number in California. He answered on the second ring. Sarah, is everything all right? Derek, I have a question about Victoria. Is she planning to stay in Massachusetts after her release? As far as I know, yes. She's required to report to a parole officer in Springfield for the next 2 years. He paused. Why? Has she talked about what she wants to do professionally? Does she have any plans? Derek was quiet for a long moment. Sarah, you need to understand. Victoria's conviction destroyed her professional reputation. No legitimate business will hire her for any position involving financial responsibility. She's going to be lucky to find work managing a coffee shop. What if someone offered her a chance to rebuild, to use her skills for something meaningful? You're not serious. I'm not sure yet. But Derek, what if the person Victoria became wasn't who she really was? What if losing everything could help her find her way back to the person who wrote caring letters to our grandmother? That's a very generous interpretation of someone who tried to destroy your life. After Derek hung up, I sat alone with grandmothers. Vision spread before me and a terrible, wonderful possibility taking shape in my mind. Victoria would be released in 3 weeks with nothing. No business, no marriage, no prospects, no family. She would be starting over completely, just as I had when I'd chosen to care for grandmother, instead of advancing my museum career. The difference was that I'd had love and purpose to guide my new beginning. Victoria would have only consequences and regret. But what if consequences could become redemption? What if grandmother's final gift wasn't just the elder care network, but the chance for both her granddaughters to become the people she'd always hoped they'd be? I spent the next 2 weeks researching federal employment restrictions for ex-felons, consulting with the Foundation's board about expansion possibilities, and trying to convince myself that what I was considering wasn't complete insanity. 30. Board meeting was scheduled for the day before Victoria's release. I'd prepared 2 presentations, one outlining expansion using hired professional staff, and another proposing something that would either be brilliant or catastrophic. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation has an opportunity to become something unprecedented. I told the 7 board members assembled in our conference room, we can create a comprehensive elder care network that addresses housing, healthcare, social connection, and practical support for elderly people throughout Massachusetts. I presented the properties, the architectural plans, the financial projections. The numbers were solid, the vision compelling, the potential impact enormous. However, I continued, successfully managing a network this complex will require someone with extensive experience in business development, project management, and organizational scaling, someone who understands both profit structures and nonprofit missions. Board President Margaret Walsh raised her hand. Do you have someone in mind for this position? I do, but my recommendation is going to sound unconventional. I took a deep breath. I want to offer the position of Director of Operations to Victoria Henderson. The silence in the room was complete. Margaret's expression suggested I'd proposed hiring a known arsonist to manage fire safety. Sarah, said board member Robert Chen, isn't Ms. Henderson your sister, the one who was convicted of filing false federal reports about this foundation? Yes. The one who challenged your grandmother's will and tried to destroy the foundation through IRS investigation? Yes. Margaret leaned forward. Sarah, with all due respect, have you lost your mind? I looked around the table at the faces of people who'd supported the foundation through every crisis, who'd trusted my judgment through every decision over the past 2 years. Maybe, I said. But hear me out. I explained Victoria's professional qualifications, her experience with business, expansion, her understanding of regulatory compliance. I acknowledged her criminal conviction but emphasized that she'd served her sentence and would be subject to ongoing parole supervision. Most importantly, I talked about redemption, second chances, and the possibility that working for something larger than herself might complete Victoria's transformation. Plus, I added, she'll work for $30,000 a year because no one else will hire her. We'll get Harvard MBA-level expertise at entry-level cost. The board debated for 2 hours. The vote was 4-3 in favor of offering Victoria the position, contingent on a 6-month probationary period and unanimous board approval of her performance. The next morning, I drove to the Springfield halfway house where Victoria was beginning her reintegration into society. She was waiting in the visitor's room, wearing donated clothes that didn't quite fit, and carrying a small bag containing everything she owned. She looked older, thinner, uncertain in a way I'd never seen before. The confident businesswoman who'd challenged grandmother's will was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely surprised that anyone had come to see her, Sarah. She stood as I approached, her voice careful, questioning. "I didn't expect you to come. We need to talk about your future." I handed her the folder containing grandmother's final plans and the foundation's expansion proposal. Victoria read in silence, her expressions shifting from confusion to amazement to something that might have been hope. "You want to hire me?" she asked finally. "After everything I did?" "I want to offer you a chance to become the person grandmother always believed you could be. The person who wrote that letter to her 8 months before she died." Victoria set down the papers and looked at me directly for the first time since I'd arrived. "Why?" "Because grandmother's final gift wasn't just the inheritance or the foundation or even the expansion plans. It was the chance for both of us to become better than we were when she was alive." "And you think I can do that? Become better?" I thought about grandmother's voice in the Rome restaurant, about 2 years of legal warfare, about the woman who'd hung up on her grandmother's final offer of redemption. I thought about the letter Victoria had written from prison, about consequences and choices and the possibility of grace. "I think you're the only person who can answer that question," I said. "But I'm willing to find out if you are." Victoria was quiet for a long time, staring at the expansion plans that represented either her salvation or my catastrophic misjudgment. What would I be called? What would my title be? Director of Operations, Eleanor Whitmore Foundation Network. She nodded slowly. "And I'd report to you? You'd report to me. The sister whose life I tried to destroy would be my boss. The sister who's offering you a chance to rebuild would be your boss." Victoria smiled for the first time since I'd arrived, not the calculated smile of a successful businesswoman, but something smaller and more genuine. "When do I start?" As I drove Victoria to her new apartment, a modest place walking distance from the foundation's main office, I realized that grandmother's plan was finally complete. Not the plan she'd outlined in her will, but the deeper plan she'd been crafting all along, teaching both her granddaughters that love requires risk, that redemption requires work, and that true inheritance isn't about money. It's about becoming people worthy of the gifts we've been given. The inheritance was ours now, both of ours, earned through consequences and choices, and the courage to believe that people can change when they're given something worth changing for. Whether we'd prove worthy of grandmother's faith remained to be seen. But for the first time, 18 months later, I stood in the lobby of the Eleanor Whitmore Center for Aging Excellence, watching Victoria present our quarterly impact report to a gathering of state legislators, healthcare administrators, and nonprofit leaders. The transformation was complete, not just of the Victorian-era mansion we'd converted into our flagship facility, but of the woman commanding the room's attention with charts showing reduced hospital readmissions, increased social engagement, scores, and a waiting list 300 people long. "The integrated model works because it addresses the whole person," Victoria was saying, her voice carrying the confidence I remembered from before prison, but tempered with something new: humility. Housing, healthcare, social connection, and purpose aren't separate needs. They're interconnected elements of human dignity. From my position near the back of the room, I caught the eye of Dr. Patricia Henley, now retired, but serving on our advisory board. She nodded toward Victoria with approval, then looked at me with something that might have been amazement. Even she, who'd known our grandmother's gift for long-term planning, hadn't anticipated this outcome. The presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause. Victoria fielded questions with the expertise that had once built Henderson marketing, but now served people instead of profit margins. When State Senator Rebecca Morrison asked about replicating our model in other communities, Victoria's response was immediate. We've prepared expansion proposals for 6 additional sites across New England. The Eleanor Whitmore Foundation Network isn't just about serving Massachusetts. It's about proving that aging with dignity is possible everywhere when communities commit to comprehensive support. After the crowd dispersed, Victoria and I walked through the center's common areas, past the library where residents were engaged in a spirited book discussion, through the physical therapy suite where 80-year-old Margaret Chen was relearning to walk after hip surgery, into the garden where former investment banker Harold Walsh was teaching teenagers from the local high school how to grow vegetables for the center's kitchen. "Remember when you thought I'd lost my mind for hiring you?" I asked as we settled into chairs on the sun-drenched terrace. Victoria laughed, a genuine sound that had taken months to return after her release from prison. "I still think you lost your mind. I just think it turned out to be the right kind of insanity." She was different now, in ways that went far beyond professional competence. The calculating edge that had once defined her interactions was gone, replaced by something more thoughtful. She listened before speaking, considered consequences before acting, and had developed an almost supernatural ability to connect with the elderly residents who'd initially been suspicious of her criminal background. "Mrs. Antonelli wants to know if we can expand the art therapy program," Victoria continued. "She says painting has become the highlight of her week, and she wants to share it with more people." Mrs. Antonelli had been one of our most challenging residents, a former federal judge who'd initially refused to participate in any group activities, convinced that moving to assisted living meant surrendering her independence. Victoria had spent hours with her, not trying to change her mind, but simply listening to her stories about landmark cases she'd adjudicated. Eventually, Mrs. Antonelli had agreed to try one art class, then another, and now led informal discussions about creativity and purpose that had become legendary among residents. "What did you tell her?" "That we'd find the funding. Senator Morrison seemed interested in supporting pilot programs." I studied my sister's profile as she watched Harold Walsh explaining soil pH to fascinated teenagers. The sharp angles of ambition had softened into something more sustainable. Purpose instead of drive. Service instead of success. "Victoria, can I ask you something personal?" "Since when do you ask permission? Are you happy? Really happy, not just professionally satisfied?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching a group of residents play cards under the maple tree we'd planted in grandmother's memory. "You know what's strange? I spent 35 years pursuing happiness as if it were a prize I could win through. Achievement, better job, bigger house, more money, higher status. I never considered that happiness might be something you build through daily choices rather than dramatic victories." She turned to meet my eyes. "I'm happier now making $30,000 a year and living in a studio apartment than I ever was running a successful business and living in Beacon Hill. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense." I think grandmother knew this would happen. Not the specifics,